Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there was a giant moose. Now it's natural that you might be wondering exactly which time this moose was upon, and why he was so large. It's actually not terribly important how he came to be so enormous, or even which time he was upon. That is to say, the moose is not important at all, primarily because he wasn't a real moose. He was, in fact, a moose made of oak wood. And at this particular point in time, he was an umbrella. The dark clouds in the sad sky fired shot after shot, but the moose took every drop that came its way, keeping the ground below its splintery belly completely dry. If this moose were alive, it would surely run for cover from the cold, wet rain. It would dance in the sunshine on the other side of the bristly mountains. It would keep itself far away from the nasty clouds, only allowing its fluffy face to feel the gentle rays of the sun, galloping in the daylight with a brilliant smile that only happy mooses have, skipping like a young cow in spring, bucking like a newborn rhinoceros, lowing and singing until dusk. If you were to see this moose, you would think differently about these kinds of animals. You might be convinced they were always cuddly and jolly and pleasant. You would run after them and hug their necks, and jump upon them to laugh yourself away into the sunset. It would be the happiest day of your life, and your eyes would be wet with rare tears of joy. The birds would see you laughing and find it too contagious to fly, and the flowers would absorb your tears and grow strong and colorful. From afar, the shady clouds would peek over the ridgetops of the mountain range and spy your limp body just as it was launched away from the sturdy back of this 1,000-pound majestic animal, sending you up into the crisp evening air and down into a waving sea of vivid daffodils. Unable to stop laughing, you would roll around as they tickled your neck and went up your nose. The moose, trapped in the same uncontrollably merry disposition, would roll around with you until you both fell asleep, just as the sun fell away into the horizon. But as I have already said, the moose is neither real nor important. Charlie was trying his best to think of things that were neither real nor important. He should have been in school attending a lesson on fifth-grade math. But on the fourth day of school, the science room flooded, and the school was shut down for repairs. Today, he was in the shallows of the lake by his house looking for tadpoles with his friend Roger. They had been waiting at the park all morning, waiting for the day to be over. The early morning had been a bit cold in their short sleeves and shorts, but now the sun was beginning to come out. Charlie put his feet in the water, but immediately retracted them. It was still too cold for that. In the far back of his mind, behind the jumping mooses, were several important things he could do nothing about. Further back in his brain, behind flowers getting stuck in his nose, were things that he wished were not real. The slippery tadpoles swam in tight circles, unaware of Charlie's presence. The sun painted the ripples of the lake with curvy lines of silver. Charlie stuck his hand in the cold, clear water and watched the little creatures swim between his fingers. But try as he might, it was impossible to think about tadpoles or frogs or even mooses. All he could think about was gooses. The day was young, and he would have another long 12 hours to wait, doing nothing. His classmate Roger was standing behind him with a long stick that had been sharpened like a knife. His bright eyes scanned the horizon carefully, as if on guard. Charlie looked up and noticed him. "Why do you have a spear with you?" Roger kept his eyes on the horizon. "I made it this morning, just in case we get attacked by any talking geese." Charlie ignored his comment and returned his gaze to the young frogs, trying hard to think about how fun it would be to swim. "Did you bring it with you?" said Roger. Charlie sighed. The sun was particularly lovely on this day, and the grass was soft and dry, and the lake was clear and sparkling, and his school was temporarily closed. By all accounts, it should have been the perfect day to run and jump and play. But how could he relax? How could he let his guard down, knowing what he knew? Slowly, Charlie touched his pocket to feel the small stone inside. "Yeah, I have it with me." "Don't get it wet," said Roger. "Samantha is probably having breakfast right now." "Yeah, she's having blueberry pancakes with Canadian maple syrup." Don't get it wet, repeated Roger. A long, lazy silence fell between the boys as they soaked in the sun at the park. A quiet wind somewhere in the distance snuck between the large trees at the edge of the grass field. I can't wait any more, said Roger suddenly. Charlie didn't respond. Roger pulled his eyes off the horizon and knelt down to lock eyes with Charlie. I'm not waiting. I'm going in. Charlie snatched hold of Roger's sleeves. No, you can't. Roger pulled away and got to his feet. I'm going with or without you. It's been 5 days. It doesn't make sense to keep waiting. Come with me right now. We can do it. Charlie stood up, looking around for ears that may be too close. He said to wait. He said there was more he had to tell us. We don't know how to find our way, and the problem isn't with one goose. It's with all of them. Roger shook his head. If you want to come, bring a spear. With a brisk pace, Roger walked away from the lake towards the street. After 40 paces, Charlie rolled his eyes and started after him. Only one door, shouted Charlie. Roger turned to see his friend joining their quest and raised his spear with a great shout. Let's go, he yelled. It was a 20-minute walk to Roger's house from the park, and since she was on the way, they stopped by Samantha's house. Put down your spear. Samantha's mom doesn't like spears. Charlie knocked on the door after Roger complied. A bright and happy smile greeted them when the door finally opened. Samantha stepped outside and beamed with joy. She looked at the blue sky, then she closed her eyes to listen to the cheerful birds chirping in the nearby trees. Her mouth was stained with blueberries, and her hair was untouched since she had woken. When she had finished enjoying the beautiful morning, she opened her eyes and looked at her guests. Her smile vanished, and her eyes closed tightly. Then she carefully stepped backward into the house and closed the door on them. Samantha had been avoiding Charlie ever since the talking goose had turned her into a stone statue last week. Charlie understood why she didn't want anything to do with geese at the moment. But he was going to need her help. Samantha was the key. She's not going to join us, said Roger, pointing his spear at the door. And I'm not strong enough to break down this door. We can't force her to help, said Charlie. She will come around once the principal explains everything to us. I hope you're right, but I have a feeling that it will just make things worse. They waited at the door a moment, giving Samantha a chance to change her mind. Tap, tap, tap. From behind them came a familiar sound of small webbed feet tapping along the street. Charlie felt the hair on his neck lift away from his skin. He looked at Roger without turning around and raised 3 fingers. Roger gripped his spear, preparing to use it. 3 fingers raised. 2 fingers raised. 1 finger raised. Now, whispered Charlie. Roger spun around with his spear high in the air, and they both shouted at the top of their lungs. In the road was a goose strolling by. When it heard the loud cry, it stopped to look at the 2 boys. Roger's roar thinned away into silence, and the goose began to waddle away, unfazed by the encounter. We scared it away, said Roger. Samantha's door reopened. This time it was Samantha's mother, looking crossly at the 2 boys. I trust you boys have a good reason for screaming at the top of your lungs on my doorstep? A bit red in the face, Charlie stepped forward. There was a goose on the road. A goose. Was he attacking you? Charlie took a deep breath, unsure how to make sense of the situation for her. No, he was just casually walking by. Casually walking by, repeated Samantha's mom. The boys nodded in agreement. Yeah, he was pretty casual about it, said Roger. Samantha's mother massaged her temples before managing a response. The next time you see a casual goose, just leave it alone, boys. But this goose was extra casual, suspiciously casual, said Roger. She pointed a finger at Roger. Stop yelling at the wildlife, Roger. Then returned again. Once again the door closed and they were left alone on the porch. What do we do now? Said Roger. Charlie walked over to the road. Roger followed. They spotted the goose a few houses down, still walking along patiently. A real goose would have flown away, said Charlie. We need to follow him. What about Samantha? I don't know yet. Maybe the principal will know. With careful footsteps, they followed the goose down the road for a few blocks without being noticed, until a tiny flying bug that had been gliding in the breeze accidentally flew up Charlie's nose, making him sneeze. The goose stopped and turned. The boys had closed the distance and were now only 20 feet away from the goose. It paused to think. Up ahead a short way was a stretch of unmaintained land by the road, full of weeds, bushes, and some trees. The goose shuffled away with a quickened pace, and after reaching the jungle of plants, he disappeared into the bushes. Charlie and Roger raced after the goose, but stopped where it had disappeared. "This bush has thorns," said Roger. He shoved his spear into the bush and felt the thorny branches claw at his spear as he pulled it back out. "Well, we need to go in after him, or flush him out," said Charlie. "Let's follow him into the thorny bush," said Roger. The boys crouched down low and looked for a hole to crawl through, something big enough to avoid most of the thorns. There near the base of the bush was a small opening, just big enough for a goose. "This hole isn't very big," said Charlie, rubbing his bare arms, "and we're not wearing long sleeves." Charlie began to walk on his hands and knees toward the opening, the thin branches grabbing onto his shirt, ripping it as he pressed forward. Then the thorns scraped his arms, and the leaves began to shadow the light. The passageway was much longer than Charlie expected. Roger had already started in after him, and it was impossible to see where the prickly tunnel would end. How could a bush block so much light? Charlie stopped and rested his belly in the dirt. "What's wrong?" said Roger. Charlie tried to glance behind him without getting scratched. It was clear now that the tunnel of branches had a slight curve to it. Charlie could no longer see any light coming from the entrance of the tunnel. Something felt strange about this place. He felt the dirt beneath him. It was cool and compact, no longer loose and dry. His palm hunted the floor and found a wooden spatula. Charlie raised his head and fixed his eyes into the darkness ahead. The smell of wet grass and flowers wafted in from somewhere further down. "Something is strange about this bush," said Charlie. "Keep going," said Roger. "It can't be much longer." Charlie crawled on deeper into the dark tunnel as all light left them. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing Charlie and Roger onto their elbows. They crawled slowly in the darkness without speaking, carefully feeling their way through the sharp walls around them. After several long minutes, a small light finally appeared, like a miniature star, floating just above the ground several yards away. It was too small to illuminate the space, just bright enough to follow. "Can you see that? The little light up ahead," said Charlie. "I can't see anything," said Roger. Charlie closed the distance and brought his face within a few inches of the light. It was like no light he had ever seen, hovering above the ground, without a lamp or a cord. Charlie reached out to touch it, but as his finger approached, the light moved away. Like two opposing magnets, the light evaded as Charlie followed it with his finger around the small, dark space. "This is weird," said Charlie. "What's going on? Why are we stopped?" said Roger. As Charlie played a slow game of cat and mouse with the little light, he could see that the tunnel had ended. There was nowhere left to go. "The light is blocked," said Charlie. "This is a trap," said a quiet voice. "Who's there?" said Charlie. "Roger, did you hear that?" "The branches," said Roger. "They're moving." With an eerie creaking, the thorns fell away from the branches as they slowly wound together into thick threaded ropes and began to curl around the boys like hungry snakes. It was impossible to struggle away, for there was no place to go, and the branches were too strong. In a moment they had become stuck. Then a goose head popped into the tunnel from above them, and a shaft of light poured into the dark tunnel. The goose's head was upside down, but its voice was clear and calm. "Gotcha," said the goose.